Hypers in chat if you're aware of a man by the name of Perspective Philosophy. Some of you seem to know, a lot of you don't. Perspective Philosophy is this guy right here. He's got a YouTube channel. How many subs does he have? An amount, presumably?
Hello, everyone.
14.3K. So he's not a nobody. 14,000 subs is certainly not a nobody. You know, he gets some good viewership on his content. You know, he seems to mostly do streams, it appears, or maybe it's it looks like he streams like once a week, and that's what he does, right? Anyway, so with that said, Perspective Philosophy, who is a vegan and a bit of a philosophy nerd. In fact, he has his own philosophy like class. This is the link, perspective-philosophy.teachable.com, an introduction to Western philosophy, a comprehensive introduction to philosophical thinkers and theories throughout history. I will not sign up for this because, guys, I'm going to be completely honest here. I'm going to be entirely transparent with all of you today. I think people who make philosophy their life might be the biggest virgins on the entire planet, okay? I can't do it, all right? When I hear any conversation about philosophy, it makes me want to leave. It makes me just want to leave. It makes me want to leave whatever conversation is being had. It's just boring to me. It's not entertaining. It's not fun. I don't like philosophical type shit. And vegans tend to do it a lot. Vegans are really big into the philosophy thing. And don't get me wrong, I agree with vegan ethics, but I'm not a very big fan of the way that many vegans act. And that's actually what we're talking about here today, because that's the source of all this drama. From November 25th, a couple days ago, Thanksgiving, actually, Natalie Wynn, our beautiful queen, ContraPoints tweeted, "I find it impossible to believe that anyone actually likes tofu. What do you like about it? The lack of taste or the lack of texture? But it takes on the flavor of seasonings. You know what does that way better though? Meat. I get that veganism is good for animals and the environment, and that's really noble and honorable of you, but it is a barren life of deprivation and self-denial." Fucking true. I feel no need to defend this take. This is clearly Natalie Wynn shitposting on Twitter about how she just wants to eat meat because meat tastes good. Like, that's clearly what this is. Like, the bimbo, I'm not going to engage with the virgin philosophy discourse around a topic. I'm just going to go with, like, whatever the fuck I want to do because, you know, bimbo moment. Like, that's literally the meme, like the joke I feel like is gone for here. But maybe it's flying over Perspective Philosophy's head. Maybe it's flying under my head. Maybe I'm getting hit in the neck by the point here, and it's actually not a joke, and she's being completely serious and genuine here, and she genuinely thinks this is a good argument against veganism. But I find that unlikely. And Perspective Philosophy decided to quote tweet this, or I should say screenshot it and post it and say, "Surely at ContraPoints, a drug addict could do with learning some self-ish denial. Just another internet socialist incapable of restraining their greed." Oh boy. Yeah. So for those of you guys that don't know, yes, ContraPoints from my drug addict wear. Hold on, wait. I'm not going to risk cancellation here by misquoting ContraPoints, so I'm just going to go ahead and find the post myself. We found it. "Sorry I abandoned you, my sweet Grams. 2020 really got the best of me. Started in a bad place and quarantine locked me there. Feels like I lost the whole year, first to emotional permafrost and then to being a goddamn junkie, literally opium. Not very smart, I know, but it's hard not to do the thing that mutes all pain. Amazing we aren't all addicts. Nearly 5 weeks I've been off it, feeling lucky to be here and alive and soberish and ready to try again. Anyway, I know sequins are traditional, but I'm not in the mood. I look like a vampire goth lurking in a princess's bedroom. Maybe comment on that." And that was 47 weeks ago. So, whoo. I'm going to be completely honest with you here, guys. I don't care what philosophical or political disagreement you have with somebody, but when they open up like this and talk about their issues with drug addiction and your response is this little puppy right here, you might just be completely separate from like the beliefs that you hold and whatever merit that they have related there. You might be a total piece of shit if this is how you talk about people in this space that have issues like this. For starters, you shouldn't be talking about anybody who is a drug addict like they're subhuman or less worthy of any type of decent human respect because of that. Just really, really, really rude. He did add a bit below. For those who are outraged, by the way, if you're acknowledging anger about something and you start that acknowledgement with "for those who are outraged," under no circumstances can what follows be a good apology. Indulgence can be destructive, restriction restorative. An addict victimizes themselves with their actions, just as non-vegans victimize animals. That might be the most backwards logic I've ever heard. Indulgence is destructive, restriction is restorative. Sure, in the context of drugs, it sure is. An addict victimizes themselves with their actions. True. Just as non-vegans victimize animals. Untrue. Like, you wouldn't compare a cutter... You wouldn't compare someone who self-harms by cutting themselves to somebody who runs out in public and cuts other people, right? Like, you'd never make that comparison. Am I the only one that just thinks this is a batshit line of thinking? Let's see what our boy Perspective Philosophy has to say in his video. We're going to watch his video and put it on 1.5 speed. So it'll zoom right by, 11 minutes. It'll zoom right by. But I'm going to give our boy here the best opportunity possible to defend his arguably quite controversial statements.
So ContraPoints and many other people on the left will have you think that veganism is a virtue, a noble sacrifice done by some sort of monastic individual capable of absolute self-discipline. As if I'm sitting here in the hills of Tibet after a 24-hour meditation cycle. Of course not. Veganism is not about virtue, it's about vice. It's not about being a saint, it's about not being a sinner. So before I begin, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I'm not downplaying anyone's struggles. I'm not undermining anyone's hardships. I understand that self-destructive behaviors can be absolutely unbelievably detrimental to an individual's life and freedom and happiness. And I've experienced the very same self-destructive behaviors in the past, whether it's in my relationship with addiction or in OCD when I've compulsively washed my hands until they've bled. I understand that self-restraint can be absolutely painful and difficult and even beyond a given individual's capacity at a single time to engage in. But the reality is that unless we recognize our own responsibility in relation to our actions, we will never be free from those compulsive or harmful behaviors that we engage in. And so any good therapist will tell...
Wait, does he think that eating meat is like a compulsive behavior? I mean, I guess it's a learned behavior that you kind of develop and become used to in your upbringing, depending on what your upbringing is. I mean, I used the upbringing example a minute ago, but I don't know if that's a compulsion, right? Like, a compulsion is different from a desire, right? Like, for example, if I bake a beautiful chocolate cake, we'll even make it a vegan chocolate cake, for example. I cook up a beautiful vegan chocolate cake, and you're on a diet, and you're like, I'm not going in on sweets right now. I'm trying to drop the calories. I'm on a diet right now, but I'm just, you see me, you're watching me as I'm making this beautiful vegan chocolate cake, right? And you're like, God, I want that so bad. So good. Is that necessarily a vice or like a compulsion? I think it's just more of like a craving. Perspective Philosophy is in YouTube chat. He should come to the website chat. That's the good chat.
Tell you the road to recovery is through accepting the responsibility for your actions. And it's something that I've struggled to do in the past, and it's something that all of us struggle to do every day of our lives to varying degrees. So I recently tweeted ContraPoints, a position which I thought was less controversial than clearly it is, about how addicts could learn self-denial. And this was in response to her tweet, in which she said that a vegan life was barren and destitute. And, of course, being a vegan and seeing the harm that could be done from a tweet like this.
Perspective philosophy, the only reason I'm making this segment is for that tweet and that tweet alone, really. Um, why? Why would you tweet that? The reason people are mad about that tweet isn't because they necessarily disagree with the idea that, like, veganism is good or that you should be a vegan or anything like that. I think they mostly took issue with you seemingly attacking her character for her drug addiction, which is something that's generally considered not good practice on the left. Here on the left, we're generally pretty, like, favorable to the victimization of drug addicts, right? I want to be very clear here, okay? When you're addicted to drugs, you're a victim of addiction, not a perpetuator of it. Being addicted to a substance, having an addiction, isn't a crime. It's not a morally bad action you're committing, a moral failure on your part that you're engaging in. And you know what? It wasn't even a moral failure on your part to even try the drug to begin with. You're chemically addicted to the thing. Your brain has been rewired to primally desire more of that substance, you know? Like, I don't know. I think people were rubbed the wrong way by that. And I think a lot of people were also rubbed the wrong way by the fact that perspective philosophy clearly kind of didn't get ContraPoints' way of speaking and typing. If you've watched a ContraPoints video, then you should almost be able to hear the tone of her voice with the sarcasm as she says this. Don't cancel me. I'm going to do my best ContraPoints impression, okay? I get that veganism is good for animals and the environment, and that's really noble and honorable of you, but it is a barren life of deprivation and self-denial. Like, you can imagine her sarcastically saying that while lounging on, like, a studded chair, you know? Am I the only one that can sort of hear that and see that in my head? Somebody out there is smart enough to understand what I mean here, okay? Somebody out there heard what I said and is smart enough to realize that is the correct take.
Was barren and destitute. And, of course, being a vegan and seeing the harm that could be done from a tweet like this, and seeing her numerous tweets and numerous engagements with veganism, which have ultimately led to her engaging and continuing to engage in exploitative behaviors, obviously I was upset. But not for myself, but for animals. Billions of animals die every year. 46 million died for Thanksgiving alone. So it's no small issue. We are living in an age which is a mass genocide. And I think that as long as huge influencers...
She would pour cow milk on herself while doing it just to upset the vegans. Wait, hold on, wait. Can I tell you guys my first ever interaction I had with vegans on this stream? Like, when I started streaming politics and I encountered my very first vegan and they were a fan of me. Do you want to know what happened? The first vegan I ever encountered very, very early on in my politics streaming stuff. They got me banned from Twitch because they donated a video to me about I believe it was the dairy industry, and it was a YouTube documentary, and I was logged in, so it didn't warn me that it was an age-restricted video, so it just kind of played the video like any normal video, and I had no reason to suspect. About 5 minutes into the video, it was going to show a dildo being inserted into a bull's asshole in order to help him ejaculate so that they could collect the bull's semen and then use it to impregnate a female cow so that they can then proceed to have more cows. Which, yes, another horrible, horrible reality of our dairy and meat industry, but also not very fond of by Twitch. And they got me for that one. They got me real quick for that one. And that was a 3-month-long ban I got on my Twitch account for it. And from that day onward, I never accepted video requests from vegans.
Who have the power to normalize and denormalize our most unethical habits and behaviors, continue to perpetuate norms and conventions which cause the suffering and death of billions of animals. I think that it should be called out.
Yeah. The bulls do. Yeah, the reason why they use a dildo in the bull's ass to help it nut is because, yes, bulls do have a G-spot in their asshole. It's like they're fucking the prostate, you know? You stimulate it with a dildo in the asshole and jack off the bull, and it works like a charm.
But I also saw a poetic irony in this. It seemed that an inability to restrict oneself was causing both the self-destruction of this individual and the harm of the other. it has the same solution. It's the same ethical issue, just on two separate sides of the same coin. We can see exploitation and addiction as part of a self-perpetuating.
I'm sorry, dude, but this is the creepiest shit I've ever seen. Like, armchair psychoanalyzing somebody's drug addiction and comparing it to their unwillingness to give up eating meat and animal products is just such a massive stretch. Such an unbelievably large stretch.
Situation of hedonistic desire which leads to the exploitation of an individual. In the case of animals, in the case of meat eaters towards animals, it's of course the exploitation of another. In the case of addiction, it's the exploitation of the self by the self. Both have the same solution, self-restraint. And this is what this video is about. Self-restraint. Self-restraint is not in fact a bad thing. I've spoke about this in my response to lean norms and on countless occasions in relation to objective ethics. The reality is our consideration for ourselves and for others spans from the same rational engagement with our desires.
Cocaine isn't physically addictive. The number one effect of being high on cocaine is wanting more cocaine, ugly inside. I find that highly, highly impossible to believe. In fact, everybody that I know who has done cocaine has said cocaine is addictive. So I'm pretty sure you're full of shit, ugly inside.
The fact of the matter is, ethics is about behaviors and desires. How we regulate those behaviors and desires in terms of restraint and endorsement, and that's what ContraPoints tells people to do all of the time. To restrain themselves, to do better, to try harder, and ultimately be a better person. She perpetuates norms and conventions of equality, which is exactly the same thing I do. But to see her then actively undermine a social justice movement because of her own preferences was disconcerting. So I decided to show a comparison which references her own experience in relation to animals. And I believe I've done that. The reality is they have the same solution. I care about Natalie, I genuinely do, and I hope she recovers and lives a long, happy life. One which she does not harm other people and use her preferences as an excuse to do so. I want this to be clear, that the same reason I care about Natalie is the same reason...
Harm other people? Wait. Are we... are animals people now? Is Natalie out there harming other people? Like, you can make the argument that Natalie is harming animals by continuing to consume animal products, but you can't... I don't think Natalie's out there harming people. You know, I don't think she's out there, like, getting, like, a new bag, question mark, of opium and, like, pulling out a shiv and, like, shivving the drug dealer. Like, I don't think she's out there hurting anybody. I think she's doing all right. Here's the issue I take with this dude's discussion. Like, he's not wrong about the animal and dairy industry, but he's making it seem like Contra's struggles with drug addiction is lesser than that of animal suffering, and that seems really frustrating to me. Well, I don't think he's even making... No, I don't agree with that, Geeky Lesbian. I don't think he's trying to claim that, like, drug addiction... I don't think she's trying to claim that Natalie's drug addiction isn't as miserable as... that or this, or I don't think he's trying to, like, draw comparisons there. I think the problem with this video more so is that he's likening wanting to eat more meat and not wanting to give up meat, like the want to not do that, which is very much just a want, to the actual chemical addiction of hard drugs such as, like, opiates, like opium, which is what she was on specifically. So I don't like that comparison because it's nothing even close.
The reason I care about animals. It's the same reason I care about myself. It's the same reason we all care about anything. Because subjectivity is inherently valuable in and of itself. In this regard, we are all one in ethical consideration. It doesn't matter what species, gender, race, or anything like that. None of those things matter. They're aesthetic differences. All that matters is the ethical foundation from which it's all built. Those lived experiences of all subjects within the world. So why did I choose the point of addiction and not, let's say, something else? And the reason is deprivation, self-denial, the restriction of desires. And how, in the case of addiction, it's clear-cut. We understand that the addict needs to restrict their desires. Of course, people on Twitter took this as merely restricting desires. Of course, none of these people have ever had to restrict their desires to the point in which it might cause an extreme pain and angst within their lives. And they may not have self-destructive behaviors, but I have. And I understand the pain and the suffering and the turmoil it can bring to try and change yourself and be a better person. But that's all we truly can do. And so I want to really drive this home. Self-restriction can be our freedom. And without it, we are lost. We lose ourselves to addiction. We spiral downwards into a path of destitution and dependence upon substances. Or...
Okay. This is an issue I also had with the... ironically, it came up again in relevance yesterday on stream. The that one PragerU video about discipline, where they featured Jocko Willink, the real life Grug man, where he talks about discipline and like keeping yourself in check and hard work and how it can set you free. And they're not wrong. When conservatives talk like this, and he is talking exactly like a bootstrappy conservative, when they talk like this, they're not wrong. Like when Jordan Peterson says cleaning up your room will make you feel better and will make you, like, will put you in a better mood and everything, like, I mean, he's not wrong, but there's more to it than that. And I think that's the same pitfall I feel like perspective philosophy is falling into here. Like, I don't feel like, I feel like they're broadening like the idea. I feel like they're generalizing desire and addiction, compulsion and vices way too much, right?
Upon experiences, or even in relation to self-destructive behaviors like self-harm. These things can get a grip of ourselves, and really, we become the victim of ourselves.
Yeah,
and so when we
250
restrain
viewers. What's up,
ourselves
guys?
from these unethical desires of self-destruction, we are free. And that's what therapy is about. Therapy is usually based on bolstering an ego, making the individual stronger so that they can resist desires which are self-destructive, whilst also combating emotional and psychological issues which can lead to unhealthy and negative desires, to allow people to express their drives in a more rational way. And that's what therapy is about. And that's exactly why it's a subset of ethics. We engage in therapy to modify behavior for the same reason that we engage in ethics, to modify behavior. It's all done for a common good. And that's what I'm trying to point out here. So ContraPoints and many other people on the left would have you think that veganism is a virtue, a noble sacrifice done by some sort of monastic individual capable of absolute self-discipline. As if I'm sitting here in the hills of Tibet after a 24-hour meditation cycle. Of course not. Veganism is not about virtue, it's about vice. It's not about being a saint, it's about not being a sinner in this respect. It's about not harming others rather than helping anyone. It's a virtue to be a kind, compassionate person. It's not a virtue to not beat people up. That is a baseline. Same thing with veganism. 46 million animals.
No, that's not how philosophy works. I don't think. I don't agree with that necessarily. Like, philosophy is socially constructed. We agree on that, right? Like the concept of philosophy is a social construct. We came up with that. We kind of invented it. At least that's my understanding of things. So I would call somebody back, like I would call like a white dude who lives in the South during slavery times and is like openly anti-slavery. I would call that guy a virtuous person, because the location, the time period, and the culture this person has been brought up in is one that naturally would have someone come to the conclusion that slavery is totally fine, totally cool, right? And yet, despite that, they have a uncharacteristically radical, radically progressive opinion for that time period in that area that they push, right? I argue that makes them a more virtuous person than if nowadays you had somebody on the street bellowing out their condemnation of slavery. It's like, well, I mean, you're not very brave for bellowing out condemnation of slavery now in 2021 in the streets of Palm Springs, California, but maybe if you were standing on the side of like a slave auction in the 1700s, 1800s, or well, 1700s. Well, no, 1800s, yeah. It was like 1800s, during slavery times in Mississippi or something, bellowing out your disdain for slavery. Then I would argue you're a virtuous person, because not only are you putting yourself in danger by having those politics, but also your politics stand out from that of the time, area, and culture you've grown up in, which is, sort of unusual and uncommon. Nowadays, that wouldn't really be considered all that virtuous of an argument, but when you're the one sort of helping to pave history, to pave the way forward for more progressive, like accepting society, when others refuse to, yeah, in our socially constructed idea of philosophy and what makes someone a virtuous person, that person would by definition be virtuous. I mean, that's my view, at least.
Animals. All individuals feeling pain and pleasure, fear, suffering, crying out, usually in dark, cramped spaces, so that individuals can have a preference for their flesh. It's not something that can be mocked, laughed at, downplayed. It is the greatest moral travesty of our time. It is equivalent to a war, if not worse than most wars that are engaged in today. The outward, at least most of us recognize that war is wrong. Very few of us recognize the harm we do.
I mean, it's probably more comparable to the Holocaust than a war, right? Because the animals aren't doing all that good of a job of fighting back.
3 times a day when we look at our dinner plates and we see a dead animal. Even today, when people sit down and give thanks for equality and diversity, it's built upon the slaughter and exploitation of over 46 million animals. The most vital interests of sentient beings being defied for the mere preferences of those who want to sit down at a dinner table and give thanks for the very virtue that they are disregarding when they consume these animals. I genuinely do not believe that you can endorse equality, diversity, and love, or benevolence even, for others, whilst continuing to justify their exploitation.
You don't have an argument against ContraPoints and what she stands for and her progressive policies and her advocacy and everything she stands for, so you call out imagined hypocrisy, which is you believe that it's bad for racism to be a thing, or transphobia to be a thing, or homophobia or sexism, etc. to be a thing, and yet you're still okay with eating animals. Gotcha, lefty. You've blown the left wing destroyed. Come on, dude. I would get it if, like, the call out was something like, you're basically doing the, how can you sit there and say racism, sexism, and fascism and reactionary politics and whatnot are bad because they hurt people, but then that makes you a hypocrite because you eat meat, and eating meat obviously hurts animals. It's like, well, I don't think that makes you a hypocrite.